On forums, people asked, "When will we see the girl walk?" As if the miracle were a scheduled show. Paparazzi, always alert for sparks, gathered at the mansion gates with cameras and microphones, searching for the perfect shot to confirm or deny the rumors. Alejandro learned of the situation when, one morning, while briefly in the city, he saw his own face on a giant screen with the headline, "The billionaire who bought a miracle?" His phone filled with messages and calls from friends, enemies, and journalists. The fact that the video had gone viral forced him to make a decision. He knew he couldn't stop people from talking, but he could protect his daughter and Nico from being turned into shallow headlines. He returned to the mansion and gathered his staff. With a firm but calm voice, he explained the situation. "What happens here is ours. We don't need the world's approval. If anyone wants to share something, think twice. And if you're not sure, come to me first," he said, not blaming anyone directly, but making clear they had to be discreet. Nico discovered the commotion by chance, when he saw his face on a magazine cover while crossing the street back to the mansion. He stopped confused, reading how they called him the prodigy boy or the new charity project. He felt vulnerable and, once inside, asked Alejandro if he should keep coming. "Of course," the magnate replied. "We can't control what people say, but we can control what we do. Your dance is for Valeria, not for them. Don't let their noise take away its meaning." Still, the noise didn't stop. The next day, a reporter hid among the garden trees and took photos of Nico carrying the speaker. Another hidden camera caught Valeria looking out the window, though her face wasn't visible and the context wasn't clear. The images were sold to a tabloid, which hinted the girl had reacted miraculously thanks to the boy. Comments split between disbelief and demands that the family show the full miracle. Public opinion, as fickle as ever, demanded instant results, forgetting that healing takes time, and this story was not a show. The outside pressure began to weigh on the staff. The cook feared going out in the mornings because people asked her questions. The gardener was photographed without permission, and his face appeared online with absurd speculations. The butler increased security at the entrance, and Alejandro hired a team of lawyers to review publications and ensure legal limits were respected. Neurologist Herrera, aware of the media chaos, decided to make a short public statement to slow the wave of expectations. "The girl's recovery is a long and private process," he told reporters. "This is not about instant miracles, but about therapy and time. We ask for respect and patience." His words didn't silence rumors completely, but at least shifted the conversation. More sensible voices began to say it was a private matter that should remain offstage. Even so, paparazzi still lingered, waiting for a picture, a gesture. Inside the mansion, Alejandro decided the best response was to keep going with their routine. He wouldn't let public curiosity slow down his daughter's therapy. He asked Nico to keep dancing as always, though now they closed all curtains and added more privacy. During one session, while music filled the room, voices were heard outside the gate. Alejandro felt a chill of frustration. He pulled the curtains slightly and saw people holding up phones, trying to catch something. He shut it again and breathed deeply. He couldn't control the world, but he could shield his home. Valeria remained unaware of the storm. In her silent world, what mattered was the rhythm, eye contact with Nico, the movement of her finger. She stayed within her own time, a time that didn't depend on clicks or shares. Alejandro then understood that patience would be his best weapon against public opinion. The viral video brought not only curiosity, but offers. A TV producer contacted Alejandro's office, proposing an exclusive documentary about the story. He offered huge sums, promising a moving and authentic story. Alejandro rejected it without hesitation. Later, an event businessman proposed organizing shows with Nico in theaters, under the excuse of raising funds for Valeria's rehab. Alejandro rejected that too. He knew that behind sweet words was the intention to exploit the boy's talent. In a late-night talk, Alejandro shared the proposals with Nico. "They want you to dance for cameras, to make shows," he explained. "What do you think?" Nico frowned. "I dance because I love it, and because I want to help Valeria. Not so they can film me and sell me. I don't want to be part of that." "Then we are too," Alejandro answered. The city's noise didn't fade, but inside the mansion, the decision to keep the process private stayed strong. Public opinion demanded quick miracles, but true miracles, if they exist, are slow-cooked, at the pace of a body taking its time to return, and of a heart learning to beat no matter the headlines. The media noise continued, even though Alejandro and his team had taken steps to protect the mansion. But the viral video of Nico had attracted people who moved in the shadows, looking for opportunities where others saw only humanity. One afternoon, while Nico left the mansion through a side path to go to the market, a man approached him. He wore an expensive suit, carried a stylish briefcase, and had a salesman's smile that never reached his eyes. "You're the boy from the video," the man said, extending his hand. "My name is Ricardo. I work with young talent. I've brought many to success. What you do is amazing. The world should see you on a stage. I can make you a star." Nico, surprised, looked down. He wasn't used to that kind of attention. "I don't dance to be famous," he answered. "I dance because I like it and because," he thought for a second, "because I help someone." Ricardo wasn't discouraged. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder full of printed contracts. "Look, I'm not talking about just any success," he insisted. "You could earn a lot of money. You could have your own show. Imagine international tours, TV programs. And of course, part of what you make could go to the girls' rehab. Everyone would win. Even Mr. Santori would benefit from the good press. Don't you think you deserve it?" Nico felt a shiver. It was tempting to think of money to help Valeria, maybe even to look for his mother. But he also felt this man didn't understand what was at stake. He bit his lip and said, "I don't know. I would have to ask Alejandro." The man nodded quickly, taking it as an open door. "Perfect. Give me his number. I'll talk to him. He's a businessman. He'll understand a good opportunity." Nico shook his head. "No, I don't want him to think I do this for money. Let me tell him. If he wants, he'll call you." Ricardo didn't push further. He handed Nico a card and left, making it clear he expected news. Nico kept the card in his pocket, feeling uneasy. That night, Nico went to Alejandro's office. "Today someone spoke to me," he said, holding the card. "A man wants me to dance in shows. He says it could help Valeria. I don't trust him, but I wanted to tell you." Alejandro read the card in silence. He recognized the name. Ricardo was known in the entertainment world for aggressive deals. His first reaction was natural. Think about numbers, consider possibilities. With money, they could hire more specialists, improve therapies. But something inside stopped him. He remembered the neurologist's words, the story shared with Nico, the way his daughter had responded to rhythm when nobody believed she could. Money hadn't made any of that happen. Trust and time had. "What do you think?" he asked, handing the card back to Nico. "I don't like it," the boy said. "I don't want to be used. I don't want people to think I dance for money. And I don't want Valeria to believe I help her because I get paid." "And if we need money for her rehab?" Alejandro asked, still doubtful. "You don't need more money," Nico said honestly. "You need patience. This isn't fast. And if money was the answer, your daughter would already be healed, right?" The boy's simple words hit Alejandro harder than any number. It wasn't a scolding. It was an obvious truth he had missed. He gave a sad smile and nodded. "You're right," he admitted. "Since we met you, I've learned not everything can be bought. Thank you for saying it. I won't do anything without asking you. And if you don't want it, we won't do it. Nico sighed in relief. Then let's tear it up, he said, ripping the card in two. Alejandro felt unexpected pride at that gesture. For the first time, he broke a business opportunity without regret. It was a broken deal of trust avoided, because for the first time, he chose to listen instead of buy. That night, Ricardo called Alejandro himself, insisting with huge numbers and promises of fame. Alejandro cut him off. I'm not interested, he said firmly. What happens here has no price. Thank you for your offer, but we won't talk again. He hung up, feeling strangely free. The next day, he told the staff what happened. He asked them not to listen to anyone offering money for Valeria's story or Nico's talent. They all agreed. They understood now that their loyalty was not in their salary, but in the mission they had taken: protect the girl and support the boy. Nico kept dancing, with no promises and no contracts. Alejandro kept watching, learning to listen before deciding. That day, while walking in the garden, Alejandro met the butler, who had been with him for years. I've never seen you rip up a card like that, sir, the butler said with a smile. I had never seen myself like this either, Alejandro answered. It's never too late to learn, right? They both laughed. It was a new kind of laugh, one born not from a joke, but from the relief of making the right choice. They had rejected a dirty offer that tried to exploit Nico, and with it, they had protected not only the girl and the boy, but also the healing process that, slow but steady, was taking place within those walls. The change in Valeria, though small, had lit a spark of hope in everyone. The mansion breathed optimism, but life rarely follows a straight path. 1 week after the first finger movement, while Nico danced to a brighter melody and Valeria followed him with her eyes, fate struck without warning. It was a rainy afternoon. The sound of rain matched the rhythm of the music in the room. Nico moved gently, marking the beat with his foot, when suddenly Valeria leaned forward slightly. No one expected that her still body could shift in such a way. The wheelchair moved just a little, and the weak girl lost balance. In an instant, she slipped from the chair and fell to the floor, her head hitting the carpet. The scream that tore from Alejandro's throat was raw, a sound he had never made before. "Valeria!" he cried, rushing to her, his heart racing. The nurse reacted quickly. She knelt, placed a hand under the girl's neck, and told Nico to stop the music. The boy, frozen in horror, didn't know what to do. His eyes filled with tears, convinced that his dance had caused the fall. "Don't move her," the nurse ordered firmly. "I'll check her signs." She pulled out a small flashlight and checked Valeria's eyes. The girl was conscious but frightened, staring at the ceiling. Her lips moved faintly, trying to speak but failing. The rain pounded the windows like a different beat no one wanted to hear. Alejandro felt everything collapse. Guilt flooded him. It had been his idea to bring the boy, to push her to move, to allow dancing in a room without securing the chair properly. He blamed himself for not taking extra precautions. The nurse calmed him. "The chair wasn't locked," she explained without judgment. "We'll check her neck and back." The doctor was called. Herrera arrived within minutes, carefully examining Valeria, asking if she felt pain. Though she couldn't speak, she blinked once when he pressed her neck. The doctor sighed. "It doesn't look like a serious injury, but we need a hospital scan." Nico watched from the corner, his small body hunched. He felt unbearable weight. He blamed himself for choosing a faster rhythm, for laughing moments before, as if his joy had triggered disaster. Alejandro noticed his face and placed a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't your fault," he whispered, though he himself was drowning in guilt. "These things happen." At the hospital, the scan confirmed no new damage. Still, the fall left a bruise and a deep scare that reminded everyone progress was not a straight line. That night, back in the mansion, the house was silent. Staff walked softly, as if any noise could shatter the fragile calm. Guilt hung in the air like a heavy shadow. Alejandro locked himself in his office, replaying the fall in his mind. He blamed himself for letting hope carry him away. He thought of ending the dance sessions, of sending Nico away with money, of closing the door to risk. The storm wasn't just outside. It raged inside him. Nico, in his room, couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, wondering if he should leave. If his presence brought danger, if his dance could cause harm, was it right to stay? He remembered the promise he had made to Valeria. Memories of his mother, of nights on the street, of people pushing him away out of fear, filled his mind. Would Alejandro push him away too? The next morning, Alejandro gathered the staff in the hall. His eyes were red from a sleepless night. "Yesterday we faced a terrible scare," he began. "Valeria is safe, thank God. Guilt is an unwelcome guest. It will make us doubt every step we take. But we cannot let it paralyze us. We made a mistake. We didn't secure the chair. That can be fixed. What we cannot fix is giving up. I will not stop this process. Nico will continue coming. But we will take safety measures." The butler nodded, understanding. The nurse suggested a stronger harness and railings. Everyone agreed to be more careful. When Nico entered the hall, he thought they would ask him to leave. Alejandro walked to him and spoke before the boy could say a word. "This wasn't your fault. I know you feel guilty, but you won't leave. We need your help more than ever. And you must know, you also have the right to be afraid." Nico was speechless. His eyes filled with tears, but this time of relief, not sadness. "I thought it would be better if I didn't come anymore." "No," Alejandro answered. "If I've learned anything, it's that we don't move forward by giving up. My daughter's life depends on all of us having the courage to continue." The storm had left its mark on the mansion. Everyone learned that healing was not a path of constant victories, but of steps forward and setbacks. They also learned that blaming each other would solve nothing. What could truly close the open door was guilt, if they let it. They decided they would not. That night, when the rain had cleared and the sky was calm, Alejandro, Nico, and Valeria sat together in silence. There was no music yet. They needed to rebuild trust, strengthen the chair, reorganize the room. But they knew the rhythm would return, and when it did, it would come with more care and more courage. In a symbolic gesture, Nico placed his hands on the back of the chair, as if to hold it steady himself. Alejandro bent down and kissed his daughter's forehead, and she blinked twice, as if to say, "I'm here. Let's keep going." After the fall and the scare that shook the mansion, the routine became an act of courage. There was fear of another accident, but also the certainty that giving up would mean moving backwards. Nico, who had always seen himself as just a street learner, discovered he had something valuable to teach. Together with the nurse, he began planning sessions where he didn't only dance for Valeria, but invited her to join in new ways. They started with simple exercises. Nico placed his hand over Valeria's and showed her how to tap the table softly with her fingers to mark a beat. At first, she didn't react. Her hand seemed rigid, like an object, but with patience and repetition, her index finger gave slow, hesitant taps. Each time it happened, Nico celebrated with a smile and a sign of approval. Slowly, Valeria began to understand that this was an exchange. Her movements created a response in the outside world, a way of asking through her body. At the same time, Nico taught some of the staff basic dance steps and coordination exercises. The cook practiced moving her feet in 8 counts while stirring sauce, laughing at herself. The gardener tried simple steps while trimming roses. These small moments broke the stiffness of the mansion and helped everyone understand the importance of rhythm, not only in music, but in life itself. Alejandro faced a harder lesson: letting go of control. He had always been the one to decide when and how things should be done. Now, he had to learn to watch without ordering, to let things flow without knowing the result right away. The nurse suggested he stop giving instructions during the sessions. At first, it was hard for him to stay quiet. He wanted to tell Valeria to move her hand, to count, to follow Nico. But he held back. He sat in a corner, breathed deeply, and repeated to himself, "Trust." One day, while they practiced tapping on the table, Valeria lifted both her index and middle finger in a timid move, as if she wanted Nico's attention. He leaned closer and smiled. "Do you want something?" he asked. Valeria moved a finger. Nico pulled out a small bell he had brought from the kitchen. "If you want me to start again, ring the bell," he suggested. Valeria looked at the bell, then at her finger, and with effort that seemed enormous, slid it to touch the metal. A faint sound filled the room. It was the first time the girl asked for something on her own since the accident. Nico looked at Alejandro, who watched with teary eyes. It was a huge moment hidden in a tiny gesture. That same night, Alejandro spoke to his daughter. "Today you asked Nico for something," he whispered. "I'm proud of you. From now on, if you want anything, just say it. You have your voice in your fingers." Valeria's eyes shone, and Alejandro chose to believe she understood. From then on, he treated her as if she understood everything. He began asking her, "Do you want to hear music? Do you want Nico to dance? Do you want to be alone?" For each question, he suggested a finger signal as a response. It took time, but when she answered, Alejandro felt another barrier fall away. Nico took his new role as teacher seriously. With Alejandro's phone, under supervision, he looked up videos about music therapy. He copied exercises, adapted them to Valeria, and experimented. One day, he tied colorful ribbons to her fingers and asked her to move a certain one when a rhythm played. It didn't always work, but the laughter when it failed was as healing as the success. Courage wasn't just facing the fear of another accident. It was learning to live with vulnerability. Nico learned to admit when he was tired and needed rest. Valeria learned to ask for breaks by ringing the bell 3 times. Alejandro learned to trust the boy's instincts and let his daughter have a voice. The nurse and the butler grew too. The nurse by trying new methods, the butler by letting go of strict routines and allowing spontaneity. At a key moment, when Alejandro once again gave an instruction without thinking, Nico stopped, looked at him, and said softly but firmly, "She knows what she needs. We're only here to accompany her, not to decide for her." It was a gentle but sharp reminder that control isn't always protection. Alejandro nodded, feeling both ashamed and grateful. He realized his obsession with control could be more of a barrier than a help. As weeks passed, Valeria began moving more than one finger. Some days, she pointed toward the door, showing she wanted to go to the garden. Nico would wheel her outside, always secured, and dance for her under the sun. Other times, she moved her finger to ask for a story. Alejandro, who once hired professional storytellers, started telling her his own childhood memories. How his father taught him to build a toy, the first time he tasted ice cream. Valeria blinked at the end of each story, as if asking for another. Practicing courage was not just about facing fear, but about adapting and listening. Nico was no longer only a dancer. He had become a patient teacher. Valeria was no longer just a girl in a chair. She was beginning to communicate. Alejandro was no longer just a billionaire buying solutions. He was a father learning to trust and let go. Together, they were becoming a small community sustained by daily gestures, by rhythm, and by a new way of living. The lesson of courage inside the mansion had grown strong. Alejandro, Nico, and Valeria had found new ways to talk, to support each other, and to keep moving forward despite their fears. Still, Alejandro felt they needed a symbolic moment, something that showed how far they had come. He remembered that, before the accident, Valeria loved the theater. The lights, the costumes, the magic when the curtain rose. He decided to recreate that feeling, but in a safe and private way. Without telling his staff, he called an old friend who owned a theater in the city center. He asked to rent it for one night. No audience, no press. Just the stage, soft lights, and the freedom to use it as a private space. The owner, touched, agreed. He prepared the theater for 3 people and left only one row of warm lights on. At sunset, Alejandro brought Nico and Valeria to the theater. The girl was wrapped in a blanket, watching carefully. She didn't know where they were going, but the tone in her father's voice told her it was something special. As they entered, the smell of wood, curtains, and dust greeted them like an old friend. The empty hall felt like a sleeping giant. The stage, lit by one soft light, waited like a sacred place. "This place is for you," Alejandro whispered to Valeria. "For you and for Nico. Tonight, no audience, no cameras. Only us. A gift for the 3 of us." Nico walked to the center of the stage and took a deep breath. He felt small in the huge space. He thought of all the dancers who had once performed there, of the applause that had filled those walls. Then he looked at Valeria, who stared at the stage with wide eyes. He took off his worn shoes and replaced them with new ones Alejandro had given him, better for the smooth floor. Barefoot, he walked to the edge of the stage, close to Valeria in her chair, seated in the front row. "This makes me a little scared," he admitted softly. "I've never been in a place like this alone." "Fear can be a bridge," Alejandro replied. "Tonight we cross it together." Nico nodded. He set his speaker on the floor and chose a soft song he had found one night while searching for rehab exercises. The music filled the theater with a warm vibration. He closed his eyes and began to move. It wasn't the same dance as in the street or the mansion. It was bigger, turns that used the wide space, jumps that left invisible marks in the air. His arms reached out, and the echo of his steps bounced against the walls. For the first time, he wasn't dancing for coins or for strangers. He danced to celebrate life, to honor the girl watching him, and the man who had opened his door. Alejandro sat beside Valeria, holding her hand. He felt her heartbeat in his palm and whispered, "Look how he flies. That's our friend, and you are flying with him." Valeria followed Nico's movements with her eyes. The stage lights reflected on her face. When he jumped, she blinked. When he turned slowly, her index finger moved with the beat. The music carried on, and fear turned into something else. What was once a heavy feeling became a force that pushed them to trust, to enjoy the unknown. Halfway through the song, Nico stepped off the stage. He knelt in front of Valeria and took her hand. "Do you want to come with me?" he asked gently. Alejandro looked at the nurse, who had come for safety. She nodded and helped fasten a special harness around Valeria, attaching her to the chair and to Nico. With care, he guided her onto the stage, keeping the chair secure. The feeling of being on the stage made Valeria's eyes fill with tears. Her blanket moved slightly on her lap. The music played on. Nico placed her in position, making sure she couldn't fall. Then he guided her hands to tap the wooden floor, marking a beat. The sound echoed like a drum. Alejandro, from below, felt his heart match that rhythm. The lights dimmed. The scene looked like something from a storybook. A boy from the street and a girl in a wheelchair, joined by music, with a father learning to surrender to the moment. Nico danced around her, never letting go of the chair. Every step was an invitation for Valeria to feel the stage beneath her. Every turn left a breeze across her face. And then it happened. The chair shook gently with Nico's movements, and Valeria smiled. Not a full smile, just the corners of her lips lifting. Alejandro covered his mouth, holding back a sob. The theater lights shone on his daughter's smile. She had turned fear into a bridge and crossed it. When the song ended, the silence in the theater felt holy. Nico, breathing hard, knelt down. Valeria lifted her index finger again. It was her way of applauding. Alejandro climbed onto the stage and embraced them both. No words were needed. The night in the empty theater was fuller than any night with an audience. They had turned fear into dance, into a bridge leading to a new chapter. As they left the theater, the moon followed them. Nico carried the speaker, Alejandro pushed the chair, and the nurse closed the door behind them. In the car, Alejandro whispered, "Thank you, both of you. Tonight I saw a different kind of miracle, not one that makes my daughter walk, but one that makes all of us walk inside." The night of the empty theater stayed in their hearts. The stage had become a refuge of bravery. They had learned that sometimes, to move forward, you must face fear and dance with it, turning it into beats that carry you to the other side. The night at the theater left a deep mark. The next day, the mansion carried an energy that words alone could not explain. The days went on as before. Nico arrived with his speaker. Valeria waited in her chair. Alejandro watched with quiet hope. But something had changed. It wasn't an instant miracle that gave the girl her legs back, but a silent transformation growing from the inside out. During the first session after the theater visit, Nico turned on his speaker and chose a special song, the same one that had played on stage. When Valeria heard the opening notes, she lifted her head. She wasn't only following Nico's steps with her eyes. This time, her head moved slightly with the rhythm. Alejandro held his breath. The nurse leaned closer to watch. And then, as if her body had remembered a forgotten instruction, she tapped the table with her index finger at the same time Nico marked the beat with his foot. It was perfect sync, a shared dance, where both led and followed at once. "She did it at the same time," whispered the nurse, careful not to break the moment. "It's not a miracle," Alejandro answered, tears in his eyes. "It's the result of their work and the connection they've built." The news of Valeria's progress stayed a secret inside the mansion, but the impact spread. Everyone's attitude began to shift. The gardener noticed that people walked more calmly. The cook found herself humming rhythms while preparing meals. Even the butler, keeper of rules, became a little more flexible with the dance schedule. Nico's steps echoed like hope in every corner. Outside the mansion, the rumors still lingered. People continued to speculate, but more and more voices defended the family's privacy. Public opinion, tired of empty headlines, began to lose interest. The noise faded, while the real story, the one that mattered, kept unfolding inside the house. The family and staff understood they didn't need to prove anything to anyone. They only needed to stay true to their own process. Dr. Herrera visited again. He wanted to see with his own eyes what he'd heard. Nico, Alejandro, and Valeria repeated the exercise. When he saw the synchronized movement of the finger and the foot, the doctor took a moment to reflect. "It's still early to talk about results," he said. "But this kind of response shows the brain is building new connections. It's not a miracle. It's neuroplasticity, something strengthened by repetition and emotional connection." For Alejandro, the word neuroplasticity didn't hit like miracle, but he understood that behind the medical term was a truth. Valeria was reconnecting, recovering something. It was shared movement, more powerful than any headline. In one session, when the music shifted to a faster melody, Valeria lifted her gaze and, for the first time, tapped her finger repeatedly, marking the beat on her own. It was initiative. Nico was surprised, and without a word, he adjusted his steps to follow her rhythm. It was as if the girl had become the teacher. Alejandro was moved to see his daughter leading the choreography. The impact was not what anyone expected. Not a miracle that made her stand, but a shared step that gave everyone a new perspective. Valeria could guide, not only learn. Hope was turning into a reality different from what they had imagined, but just as precious. That afternoon, while having tea in the kitchen, the cook asked shyly, "What if this keeps going? Do you think one day she could lead all of us in a dance?" Nico shrugged, smiling. "She already is," he said. "And she didn't even need to stand up to do it." Alejandro laughed and nodded. "That's true. What amazes me most is that we don't need to call it a miracle. It's simply her, being herself, finding her voice." That night, alone in his room, Alejandro reflected. He thought of all the times he had wished for an instant cure for his daughter. He thought of how Nico's arrival had shaken him, forcing him to look beyond traditional solutions. Now he understood that the real impact wasn't full recovery, but discovering new ways to communicate and connect. They were learning to celebrate small victories, not to waste the beauty of the tiniest gestures, and most of all, to accept that the outside world's expectations didn't match the reality of a life rebuilt step by step. The next day, when Nico arrived, he told Alejandro that a group of street kids had come to him, asking if he could teach them to dance. They had seen the viral video and felt inspired. Nico smiled, but he also worried. "I don't know what to tell them," he admitted. "They want something I'm not sure I can give." Alejandro looked at him and saw himself reflected, but in a mirror that showed a different image. A man learning to listen. "Listen to them," he said. "Maybe, just like you helped us, you can help others. And maybe it's time to share what you've learned here." That thought planted a seed. The connection between Nico and Valeria could grow and reach others. Alejandro, aware of his own responsibility and power, began to imagine creating something bigger. Letting go of his old world showrooms and building spaces where music and dance could be therapy for more children like Nico and Valeria. The impact Alejandro, Valeria, and Nico had experienced inside the mansion was now echoing beyond its walls. The talk they'd had about other children wanting to learn to dance didn't just fade away. For Alejandro, who had built his life chasing material success, that seed became a call to action. He realized his wealth shouldn't only protect his private world, but also create opportunities for others in situations like Nico's. He thought of the benches Nico had been kicked off, the hospitals full of children without access to alternative therapies, and the helplessness he himself had felt when medicine had failed his daughter. He made a decision that surprised many. He stepped back from several high-profile projects. He canceled the expansion of a luxury boutique chain, postponed the acquisition of a tech company, and sold his collection of vintage cars. The money went into something completely different. An integrative program of dance and music for street children and rehabilitation centers. He named it Rhythms of Life, a name that captured the essence of what he had discovered at home. He called a press conference to make the announcement. People expected another business strategy, but instead they found a different Alejandro. No tie, honest eyes, flanked by Nico and the nurse. Valeria wasn't there in person, but her presence filled every word. "Today I'm giving something up," Alejandro said at the podium. "I'm giving up the belief that wealth is only measured in storefronts and possessions. Today I present Rhythms of Life, a program that will bring music and dance to children like Nico, kids on the streets or in hospitals without access to creative therapies. Dance saved hope in my home. Now I want it to save hope in other places." He explained the plan. Open dance centers in poor neighborhoods where instructors, trained dancers like Nico, would teach rhythm and movement. Build rehabilitation rooms in public hospitals with mirrors, bars, instruments, and adapted equipment. Include psychologists, therapists, and volunteers so children could receive emotional as well as physical support. And create scholarships for those with talent who wanted to study dance professionally. The reaction was mixed. Some applauded with emotion, Others sneered that it was just an image strategy. But Alejandro wasn't looking for approval. He had learned, by listening to Nico and his daughter, that honest motivations don't need outside validation. At the same conference, Nico took the microphone. "I'm one of those kids," he said. "Music and dance saved me. This program isn't about fame. It's about giving others a place where they won't be kicked out, where they won't be afraid to sleep or to express themselves." His words, simple and direct, echoed louder than any numbers. Soon after the announcement, Alejandro began the work. He met with community groups, contacted foundations already working with street children, and consulted therapists to design the new spaces. He let go of polished showrooms and focused on forgotten places. When he visited a children's hospital, seeing the gray walls and the smell of disinfectant, he imagined the contrast. Mirrors and music filling the space, changing the energy of the children inside. The first Rhythms of Life schools opened in small storefronts near the plazas where kids often slept. Nico, along with other young dancers, gave the first classes. At first, children peeked in shyly, hands in their pockets, watching from the doorway. Nico welcomed them with a smile, showed them simple steps, and told his story. Knowing he had once been in their place, the kids lost their fear. They began to copy the moves, laugh at mistakes, and feel their bodies could create something beautiful. In the rehab rooms, nurses saw children in wheelchairs tapping the table or moving their eyes to the beat, just like Valeria. Families, who once saw hospital corridors as the end of hope, now found music-filled spaces that gave them light. Even some doctors, skeptical at first, started to see benefits. Patients slept better, spirits lifted, and in some cases mobility improved. Alejandro became a regular visitor. He no longer spent his days only in boardrooms. He now sat on the floor with children who told him their stories. He listened, learned, and shared. He discovered his presence, without luxury, without distance, was as valuable as his millions. Nico came along too, laughing with the kids, telling them about the mansion and the theater. He showed them that the word miracle didn't always mean something grand. Sometimes a miracle was moving a finger, smiling, or tapping the ground to a song. Over time, the press stopped chasing the miracle headline and began covering the openings of the centers. Reports showed kids like Nico finding in dance a way out of the street. Social media filled with clips of small shows in poor neighborhoods, group therapies in hospitals, and children discovering joy through rhythm. The story of Alejandro, Valeria, and Nico became a symbol of what could happen when someone gives up display windows to embrace humanity. Alejandro knew this program would not cure his daughter, nor instantly bring back every child's laughter. But he understood he was building something lasting, a legacy bigger than his empire. And as he watched Nico teaching under a tree, surrounded by children who followed his steps, Alejandro felt a peace he had never known in his richest business days. He had given up the showrooms, yes, but he had gained something far brighter. Lives moving to the rhythm of hope. Months passed since Rhythms of Life opened its doors, and since Valeria had marked her first conscious beat. The Santori mansion was no longer a place of empty echoes, but a home filled with movement. Afternoons still had Nico and his speaker at the center, but now there were also children arriving from nearby centers to join the sessions. Among them was Mariana, a 10-year-old girl who couldn't move her legs after an accident, and Jose, a 14-year-old who had lived on the streets since he was 7. They came in with frightened eyes and left with shy smiles, learning that rhythm doesn't discriminate. Alejandro had turned the mansion into an open space, not for the curious public, but for those seeking healing. He stepped back from business, delegated responsibilities, and spent his days between meetings with therapists and afternoons inside the program's rooms. He discovered that the title of multimillionaire meant little compared to his role as a father and as the driving force of a project that changed lives. The ambition that once pushed him to buy companies now guided him to build projects with human value. Valeria continued on her path, slow but steady. Her fingers moved with more control. She lifted her gaze when she heard her name. Her breathing followed the music's rhythm. Once, when a group of children visited the mansion, she rang her small bell to mark the beat so everyone could dance together. The children looked at her with admiration, followed her timing, and the room filled with laughter. The girl who had once been immobile in her chair was now leading others without ever standing up. Nico had become a role model. He accompanied Alejandro to open new centers in other cities. He told his story in schools and public squares, and every time he finished, children ran up to hug him and ask him to show them a specific step. He discovered that teaching was as rewarding as dancing. His dream of joining a professional dance group mixed with the joy of seeing others find their rhythm. In time, he formed a dance company made up of former street children and young people with physical disabilities, staging performances that told stories of resilience and dignity. Society, which at first had been dazzled by the boy in the mansion, now spoke of rhythms of life as proof that art and solidarity could transform reality. Festivals were organized in neighborhoods once known only for sirens. Public hospitals adopted dance therapy as a complement to treatment, and schools began including dance in their programs as a form of emotional and physical expression. One evening, Alejandro sat in his garden, watching a group of children practicing outside under Nico's attentive eye. Valeria was beside him, tapping the table softly with her fingers to mark the beat. The breeze moved through the trees like another instrument. He closed his eyes and listened to the combined sound of laughter, music, and footsteps. It was an imperfect symphony, full of uneven voices and broken rhythms, but it was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. He smiled, knowing life would never be the same. He had stopped chasing the noise of the markets and was finally enjoying the heartbeat of his own home. In the closing scene of this story, Nico takes Valeria's hand and lifts it so her fingers tap against the wood. Alejandro, now more a father than a businessman, leans in and taps along with them. The rhythm spreads, reaching everyone around them. The cook, the gardener, the butler, the neighborhood kids, the therapists, the doctors. Though each has a different story, in that moment they share the same beat. The glass walls that once divided their worlds have been replaced by a bridge of steps and music. The future promises no instant miracles, no perfect endings, but it moves forward slowly, full of small victories and the certainty that together they can keep dancing through any adversity.